I'm Jim Rimbach, president of CX Global Media and host of the Customer Service Weekly podcast powered by PACE, the official podcast of National Customer Service Week, where our purpose is to help you ignite CX celebration all year. Each episode, I meet with senior leaders from top brands as they share their story on how they recognize and lead the people and solutions that help their organizations to deliver a customer experience that separates their organization from others, so you can ignite your own CX celebration. And now, on to the show. Okay, CX Igniters. Today, I'm excited because we have somebody on the show today who has the ability to look at things from a global perspective and yet make them personal. And that's Donald Hicks. He's on the Customer Service Weekly podcast with me, which is powered by the PACE Association. Donald, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jim. I'm very excited to be here with you all today.
We've already had a great discussion, so I have to be really careful because it's like, okay, I need to make sure all those points get within something that we can record so people can share. Before we get to those things, if you could share with the listeners a little bit about, who you are, the organization that you work for, and maybe a little bit about your background, because I think that's important as well.
Awesome. So first, I'm just very grateful, Jim, for this time with you. I'm very excited as well to be talking with you and everyone around CX. A little bit about myself. So my name, again, is Donald Hicks. And I work at Twitter. I lead a team called Twitter Service. And the way you should think about us is we are the global operations team for Twitter. When we hold a whole host of responsibilities, but the most important thing is to just ensure that every user who comes to our service and our platform has a magical experience. And so I'm off every day trying to make that happen. That is sort of what gets me up every day and gets me excited. What I want you to know about me and the things that I'm passionate about is I am sort of in that middle as a leader between someone who's passionate about operation and operational excellence. My background is a heavy amount of operations and finance. And most recently, over, I'd say the last 10 or 15 years, I've moved into this world of consumer experience. And wow, it's an industry and it's an area that just gives me so much joy. And it's because it's giving me the ability to connect directly with users, with consumers every day. And so my two passions now are trying to merge the worlds of operations and consumer experience. And I believe, Jim, if you're able to do that as a company, the sky's the limit. Like, companies can go anywhere if they put those two mix of disciplines together.
Well, as the VP of service at Twitter Service, I start, thinking about, the operation, and it could be all over the place. I mean, you're talking about global, right? Yes. I think when you and I met a few years back, we had talked about really the size and scope, of your service organization. And for me, it's kind of like, at the time, I started thinking about small but mighty.
Yes. It's a really good way to think about Twitter in general, like relative to our peer set. So when you start thinking YouTube and Facebook, we are small and mighty as a company, but we have what's so fascinating, and I didn't even know this until I joined Twitter, was the global reach that Twitter has is in comparison to those companies every day. And so my role and a lot of the roles, of my peers is to try to replicate these amazing experiences, but we perhaps don't have all the resources that some of the other companies have, but it's still okay. The ultimate goal, and especially in my world, doesn't matter about those things. Be small and mighty and figure out how can we impact every customer who comes to Twitter. So that's the work that I do every day.
Well, okay, so let's hone in on that a little bit, because we talked about, content moderation. We talked about, context of that. And you and I had a good conversation about the global effects of that. And that's why I had mentioned something about thinking globally, but trying to act locally. And I think for many organizations, we're finding that to be true more so than ever before, especially when you start talking about COVID. I think it made this world a lot smaller than it was prior to. Because of now, I mean, what was the statistic? Something like sales on the internet went up 42%, since COVID. I mean, that in itself makes the world kind of smaller. And so you have people who can exchange and interact and and go through the whole merchant process and mercantile process, throughout the entire globe. But how, if you can, share with people what you mean by that context, content, and the localization and globalization issue.
Yeah, what I mean by that, and what challenge that we face every day within Twitter is this idea of how do we, in some regards, police the content that's on the platform. So that in itself becomes the content moderation. We don't want to get into the middle of it and sort of pick winners or losers, but we also have some principles that we live by. We want to make sure that the platform itself is safe. There isn't any level of abuse, misinformation, etc. Well, that is an amazing sort of goal to go after. And it's what we wake up every day as a company trying to achieve. But as you point out, like the devils are in the details, and it truly is very difficult for us in my world of operations. And how do you enforce content moderation at scale? A couple of years ago, and Jim, you and I talked about this earlier, so I'll share it with everyone. A couple of years ago, the conversation was, and especially when I joined Twitter, was just about how do you scale big? Like just go big, go global. Never mind sort of, how you show up in these markets. Just make sure you have presence there so that if any individual reaches out, we feel like we can help them, or that we can take action on something that they see. And to give you perspective on the scale that I'm dealing with, I engage with over 1 million customers a week. So in terms of that scale, that's what we did. It might have grown, but we think that's about the scale of the 911 call center in the US. So that is the level of scale that we're operating at every day. Now, what has happened though, and it's been very interesting over the last couple of years, is the idea of scale, which is incredibly important, still important, is sort of out there. What we're having to do is supplant that idea of scale with the idea of context and localization. And so for us, what that means is we have to be able to be in every market, but in every market, we have to understand the needs of that market and the customers and how our product, Twitter, is showing up and how are we able. So, we wrestle with things like localization. We wrestle with things like, our enforcement policies, which may work very well in the US or may protect a certain group in the US. They don't mean anything in another country or another market. And so you have to reshape those policies. We have to reshape how we think about those enforcement methods that we use to serve the markets that we're in. And so that is, I mentioned to you earlier, I'll say it again, the companies that can figure that out the fastest, how to scale, but scale with this idea of context and be able to serve a local market with a high degree of quality and with speed. That's the holy grail. If we're able to do that, it's going to be magical. And Jim, I lost you. I can't hear you on my side. Okay.
Well, as you're talking, I start really thinking and visualizing in my head a maturation model. So in other words, I'm going for the growth, but then at some point I need to start thinking about the retention and the relationship and the referral and the recommendation and the loyalty piece. To me, I think that's what I interpreted you just said.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so that's what's so fascinating about my operations in my business. Yes, I have an operations team that's focused on consumer experience, and I'm so thankful for them. Huge team around the world. But some of the areas I'm being pulled into by our product teams, by our eng teams, is into new topics in conversation, like onboarding and churn. Like from a tech perspective, those aren't classic things that companies such as mine would even think about, or at least invite us into the room to talk about. And so having us come into the room now and have earned our right at the table to say, this is the voice of the customer. And this, if you do these things, or if you build the features in this way, it's going to help with churn and the reduction of it. That is just mind blowing. And again, now we're getting to that maturation point, or at least the point by which we're understanding how the product shows up in each one of these markets and how we can keep customers coming back every day.
Well, I think that's very helpful because I think it's also important to note that I think you didn't, when we first met, you hadn't been with Twitter for a very long period of time. And we had talked even before we started recording here a little bit about how that maturation, has kind of, evolved as well. But one of the things that stood out when we met, a few years ago was just like a second ago, you're talking about that connection and that commitment to your customer. You also do the same thing internally.
Yes. Yes. Yes, we do. I talk about this quite often. When we met a couple of years ago, I talked about this. I think it's extremely important. And it is that making that connection internally with, everything from our employees to the agents who do the work. We want to draw this very strong bond and line between everyone, that everybody understands the mission that we're up against and what we are trying to do. Twitter itself sees itself as the somewhat gatekeepers. We try to, in earlier times, we thought of ourselves as having a service to be the public square. That conversation or that thought has evolved to, we want to serve the public conversation. Well, for me and my organization within operations, I like to say I'm the active ingredient in making that happen. That's why we're called Twitter Service, because we are the active ingredient in bringing these connections together. It's very interesting, Jim. I'll tell you a little bit about the mission of my actual organization. We created our own mission in sort of service to Twitter's overall goal. And our mission within my organization is to create meaningful connections with all of our customers that will help them and incentivize them to want to participate in that public conversation. So we see ourselves as that active ingredient. And what I think has been the secret sauce for our maturation and our accelerated growth as an organization is I have taken that thought both from an internal perspective, every tweet, as we call ourselves, understanding that mission. And I've brought that out externally to all of the agents who we see as no different than the tweets. Like everyone is the same. We're all driving toward the same mission. And that is, how do we make the experience for a customer who wants to use a platform the most magical that it can be? And so I think that has been the difference, and it has been the evolution since the first time we met a couple of years ago.
Well, all I can say is that for those of you that are listening and watching, I think you can obviously see why, Donald has been able to make that transformation within the organization, because he's very inspirational, and I'm glad he's here. So when I start thinking about, though, into some specifics with, that recognition and appreciation piece, and that's one of the things that we want to bring out here. Tell us a little bit how you may have celebrated Customer Service Week this year, knowing that I have teams around the world. I'm probably even remote within those teams. How have you been able to show that appreciation so that your people are doing the job that you need them to do and that they want to do?
Yeah, I think it does come down to, taking a moment, and we've done this. It is so appropriate or apropos, as they say, for this week, because of the work we've done last week around the U.S. election. That was a big milestone and moment for us as an organization. And so where you find us this week is in a bit of a celebratory mood. Why? Not because of the results of the election, because, we don't generally care. Like, what we are celebrating is how we showed up as an organization. And it was in these areas of quality and speed. We were deflecting misinformation off the platform, and we were holding true to our principles. And so if you look at any of the sort of news articles or news runs, there's a little bit of a aha moment with our sort of news media partners. And they're like, wow, like Twitter was able to sort of step up in the sort of most precarious time period for the US and make sure that their platform was safe. That was all, or a large portion of my organization was behind the scenes making that happen. So where you find us now, Jim, is in that celebratory mode. And what I'm doing is trying to reach out to every agent, every tweet, and give some level of thanks and gratitude for the work that they've done. We try to showcase. Jack has reached out. Like, all of these things infuse the meaning of the work that we do and get people excited. And what we have found is it obviously, from a tactical perspective, it reduces attrition. In my organization, attrition rates are low. In my agent sort of centers, it's some of the lowest that we have found in the industry. And it's because we try to infuse this level of celebration. We also try to infuse this level of thought leadership and empowerment. And so for people, last point I'll make is for people to see us pushing this idea of empowerment, and you have the right to make a call, and then having them use that empowerment during the most critical time, which was the US election. Wow, people are just, they feel so overjoyed. They feel so valued in the work that they're doing. And I think that's what keeps the benefits going for us.
Well, and as you're saying that, I mean, I start seeing, going back to my whole, bringing things full circle as a small but mighty thing.
Yes.
You start talking about impacting or affecting or supporting or, however the viewpoints are in regards to, that election process on a social platform such as Twitter. What heck, I think, that people were called to Congress to testify, on all that. I mean, that was a big deal, and that's a global impact.
It's a big deal. I'm happy to share, and this point around small but mighty really resonates with us and with us. We actually take it as a badge of honor. Give you some comparison, just so we, everyone can understand, and you can do your own research and sort of figure it out. But I think Facebook may have highlighted they have like over 35,000 content moderators doing the work, and rightfully so. Right, the work that they do is extremely difficult. We have about 3,000 total. So it is totally different. And we are very small relative to those companies, but are expected to show up in the same way with the same scale. And so we have had to, put in some thought around how we're going to do that. And what we believe is that we're going to do it through technology. And so we've invested, since you and I have met, we've led many initiatives by which we have invested in our proactive detection and remediation work. And we use that with our content moderators and our full-time employees at Twitter. And that sort of mix is what keeps us small and mighty, but gives us the ability to offer out these great customer experiences.
Well, and even as you're talking about that, I start thinking about, I keep going back to that whole component of maturation, that whole concept of maturation. And you and I talked a little bit off mic about, I guess you'd say the openness, of Twitter versus where you were and where you are now, and you sharing, this message with us. And thanks for doing that. Is you do things differently when you're closed versus when you are open.
Yes.
So I would dare to say you can also correlate that with a customer experience. Yes. So when you start thinking about the impact of moving and maturing and getting and starting to thinking more about experience and retention and value, how do you see that has changed the customer experience?
I think it for us here at Twitter, to answer that question, it all gravitates towards this idea of trust. Users are not going to come in droves to our platform and stay unless they have this level of trust that the content that we serve up to them is real, and that, quite frankly, the customer experiences that they're having are ones by which it's free of abuse. They feel safe and the like. And so for us, what we had to do, and I'm so thankful to be a part of this journey for the last 3 years, is accelerate our ability to build on that trust. And the way we've done it, and if you look, Jack Dorsey, who testified before the hearing, before Congress a couple of weeks ago, spoke about a very important point. And it spoke directly to our organization. And it was this idea of transparency. And so to build that trust, we need to build transparency. And that was something that, while we aspire as a company to be, to do, it's taken us, Jim, some time to make that happen. And so I feel like as an organization, as a leader of this organization, us putting ourselves out there, just yesterday, New York Times ran an article by which they were sort of highlighting how transparent we were with some of our enforcement measures that we've taken on the election. That's game breaking, that's new. And we are trying to build the muscle to do this more often. And it's going to be driven by my organization. And ultimately, if we're able to do that, it drives us back down to this idea of trust. Trust then drives more accelerated growth in users. And that's what I think we all want.
It is, except, depending on where you are in that maturation model, right? Okay. So if I start looking at the whole where we were, where we are, where we're going thing, I start thinking about how thinking has changed, how perceptions have changed, and how things that used to be true are no longer, right? So is there something that kind of stands out to you to say that, well, that's not a customer experience truth for me anymore?
I think some of the classic things in customer experience, I think we felt, or I used to be taught, like, you build the classic omni-channel, they'll come, and they as customers will essentially suffer through it. Like, however that degree of service you deliver to them, they'll keep coming. Those days are gone, clearly. And that's even before today. Like, I think we've had to be nimble and shift. But what I'm seeing even more so is that this idea, customers are extremely intelligent and smart. And so they figure out a way to become even more demanding. And in my space of Twitter, the days where we could hide behind a curtain and just send out an email, a pre-formed email or a tweet, like, those days are gone, Jim. Like, customers are really looking for the one-to-one interaction. They want to know, and there is some balance with chat bots and sort of artificial intelligence, but they, at least in my world, really seek the one-on-one conversations. And so we've had to learn is, relearn is that whole idea, sort of this preformed, set of communication approaches that we've used, staying behind the curtain, no one sees us, but they can hear us. Those days are gone. We have to get out there. We have to meet customers where they are. And when we meet them where they are, we have to bring our A game, because they are demanding that the customer experience is great. And that's totally new for this organization.
So, okay. Now, transformation, there's a couple different ways that we make changes. Mm-hmm. We make them because they're directed. Hey, I was told I needed to do this. We do it because we're inspired. That's really what I want to be and what I want to do. Or we do it out of fear or scarcity. So it's like, hey, our numbers have tanked. Usage is tanked. Our ad spend is tanked. We got to do something different, right? So when you start looking at that, that's all part of the maturation process too. I went from this size to this size, and either I went away or I was acquired, or I was the one who did this disrupting. There's all these different dynamics, and a lot of them are definitely human and people driven. But if you start thinking about where you are in that mix, because I said you're inspirational, as an individual, you're very much so. So when you start looking at from an organizational culture perspective, where does Twitter sit now within those paradigms?
Where I would say Twitter sits now, and it's reflected even in the organization that I lead, is perhaps to lean more toward this being a part of the mission and inspirational and sort of forward thinking and bold. We're leaning more toward that. However, that hasn't always been the case, clearly. That has shown up, though. I would say if anyone just takes a look at the last 6 months and some of the sort of out front decisions we've made as a company around work from home, what we've done around, some of the societal shifts that are happening and, cultural issues that are out there, like the BLM movement and all those things around inclusion and diversity, and sort of our boldness in what we've done as a company, I think speaks to where we believe how we want to show up as a group, as an organization, and as people around this mission of serving the public conversation. But it hasn't always been that way. I think what I would say is if I go back, Jim, to when I first started, maybe 3.5 years ago, a lot of what I was saying, a lot of what I believed sort of centered on this idea of we need to offer an amazing customer experience. However, I inherited an organization who in their maturation point were in this sort of startup mode, right? They had been in a startup mode for a very long time. Bright, brilliant people, but it's a space of chaos. You sort of everyone does everything. And so there's no discipline. There's no sort of forward thinking. It's just get us through today. And what sort of comes out of that is sort of this very cold, mechanical way of delivering a service. I wouldn't even call it customer service. It's just a service to get us through the day. And so what ended up happening was when I joined, it became more of a directive, and it became more of we're going to go with this guy because he's new and he's our leader and he's kind of giving me this directive, but I don't quite see it. And over the years, being able to be on this journey with them as being on the journey as much as me learning from them and how to adapt has been this sort of very looking back, this very cool ride where we've kind of grown up together and how we're going to deliver this great customer experience to Twitter and be bold in doing it. And so that's what I'm super proud of. I really am. If you all take nothing back from the day, I'd say you meet us at a moment where we are extremely proud as an organization, and we're extremely proud because we see that goal starting us to start to make some traction toward that goal of offering great customer experiences around the world.
Well, and I think from, talking about that change and that maturation and what we used to envision, as what experience is and what it should be and what other people think, oftentimes that gets very convoluted. But there's a different direction and path that we need to go on. So if you start thinking about that, what are some of the things that, you think that you need to jettison, not do anymore, not think about anymore? And you kind of hit on these a little bit, but if you could be quite clear to give people advice on where they need to focus.
Yeah, where I believe people need to focus is, number one, from a consumer experience standpoint, they need to focus on transparency. That's huge. I think it's a huge value sort of driver within the organization, whichever organization you are part of. When you're trying to deliver great customer experiences and services, being as transparent, less robotic as possible is extremely important. Second is to double down on technology. I think there's a great intersection between sort of human resources doing levels of customer service and customer care, and then technology and investing in it. In my world, in content moderation, that comes out in terms of proactive detection and remediation, so we can get the bad things out and promote the good things. So I think keeping that. The third and final thing that I haven't quite touched on here, but it sort of goes with the earlier point around context, is around inclusion and diversity in hiring. And so that has become a huge thing for me. And that's not just with the people that we hire within Twitter, but largely then these massive sort of organizations that and third-party organizations that we hire who do contact center, customer care type of work, just making sure that the agents that we hire or the contractors that we hire, we really are very intentional in diversity and inclusion. And the reason I say that, Jim, is because with that sort of new set of people, because what comes to light is a diversity of thought, and it just makes us, I think it makes us smaller, leaner, and meaner in terms of being able to identify the trends and connect with our customers across the globe. This is something I have had to contend with, and we've been intentional over the past year of trying to build out. So, and rightfully so, because I'm trying to serve up this platform and this service across the globe. So I have to have the people who work in this organization look like those people in the local markets that we serve.
Well, I mean, that's another one of those journeys that may take a while, but obviously you're the man in order to make it happen. Now, you looking at, your career path,
yes,
and looking at, how you've gone about getting to where you are today. You've had a lot of people provide advice and, mentors and things that you followed and you believed in. And so now it's time for you to give some paid back, right?
Yes.
What would you tell a person who is an emerging leader in contact center and or customer experience? if they were the young you coming in?
It's a really, really good question. I think some of the things some of the advice I would share is number one, this idea of customer experience and operational excellence. If you can lean into that and sort of really become an expert in those two areas, I think it's going to serve you extremely well. That's number one. And again, why I say that is you need operational excellence, because what that drives is sort of the classic ideas around customer care and customer experience, operational scale, accuracy, speed, all the things that are sort of lifeblood of what the work that we do. But if you layer on top of that, this idea of customer experience, wow, that's a magical thing. If you can deliver operational excellence at scale with discipline on a consistent basis and give this magical experience to customers, I believe, Jim, that and I have seen it, and I don't just have to believe it, I've seen it work in companies where it drives the bottom line. And so that's number one. Second, I would offer up and encourage people to truly focus on the relationships, the cross-functional relationships, and as leaders internally within the company, just make sure that people understand the value that comes from the work that we do. A lot of times, and it's getting better, I have to say, but what I had to fight against earlier on in my career is that, someone in product, someone in, just name the group, just thought of us as, again, behind the scenes. Oh, you're just doing call center. Like, you're just talking to customers and not understanding, number one, hello, this work is extremely complex, actually. And two, it has a huge amount of value to the organization because we are talking to the customers every day. So you can learn from us if you allow us in the room. And so really focus on building those relationships, those cross-functional relationships, and demonstrating at those moments the value you can get out of the centers or the operations that you all own. I think those are two. And then I think the third one is finally, this is one that I'm big on right now, and I'm really pushing it within the organization, is just self-care. It's a big thing. I wish, Jim, I would have focused on that earlier in my career. I was just go. I was so fascinated and inspired by this work that I can be honest, like sometimes it led to burnout, and I just had to step back for a moment. And so self-care is extremely important. And what I didn't know, the secret thing that I didn't know was that I now know is not only was that a reflection of me, but my leaders or directs and my overall organization was mimicking what I was doing. And so it led to burnout. It led to retention issues, et cetera, because they were following me. And so I think that's the third and final thing I would tell you all. I wish I could, build that time machine and go back in time and kind of tell my earlier version of myself. I didn't have the salt and pepper beard and all that at that time. I would definitely tell them those three things to keep in mind.
Well, and I would like, and thank you for sharing that. And I would like to go a little bit further, because when we did meet a few years ago, that whole self-care was something that was heavy on your mind then.
Yes.
And so I would like, if you could share how you've taken that self-care and really, talked about getting it to that, that agent level and supervisor level and downward within your organization, so that, they are, kind of like what you were saying with the metrics, really finding the balance between the efficiency and the effectiveness, right? It's like, where's the sweet spot? What do you?
Yeah. So first thing I'm going to speak from a personal perspective, but I'm also going to speak from sort of a leadership standpoint. And this to all of the leaders or managers that are out there, the first thing I'd say is empowerment is a good thing. Please empower your agents. I mean, it will do wonders for them. Like, you will see returns on them that you've never seen before if you really drive home this idea of empowerment. And with that empowerment becomes this idea of decision making and them owning sort of their day. And so one of the things that I think have benefited us very well within Twitter and within the organization I run is that I've given agents the ability and some flexibility to make not only decisions on when they take breaks and lunch and all, but also in the content, the work that they're actually doing. Right. And so what we've done is given them the ability to say, look, I want to turn it off. I've seen this type of case the last 100 times, right? And it's just eating away at me. I don't want to take these cases on. I will punt it to someone else, or maybe I become the QA, and I don't have to deal with the work, the volume of that work. But now I'm giving advice to others, things like that. Or maybe I'm auditing. Giving agents that level of flexibility, I have found, has really worked in providing retention and self-care. Another thing I've done around the globe from an operational perspective, just being very honest and open, is we've opened up counseling sessions, individually and group. And we've done that with our partners, our third-party partners, sort of really building these programs all centered on mental health is good, resiliency is good, et cetera. And while I have to be respectful of how that is perceived in different markets and in different cultures, even just opening that up, Jim, has offered out this huge amount of goodness and gratitude, and more importantly, retention. So from a leadership perspective, I'd say definitely go all in. That is top of mind, and it is definitely something that will pay dividends. On the personal side, I'll just say very quickly, while I'm not as good at it every day, honestly, I'd say one of the things that I do try to focus on: mind, body, soul, and then the customers. So, just trying to focus on myself and the mind, just making sure mentally I'm not seeing the worst of the worst on Twitter every day, because you become numb. The body, getting out, trying to be active, that's extremely important in times like this with COVID. And then soul. So for me, just having some spiritual connection, for me, it's with my family and just being able to just hang out with them and laugh and have time. These are all restorative things, Jim, and it really, really helps from a self-care. So it's extremely important. And I think it's part of the secret sauce as leaders, if you can figure it out.
Well, I would dare to say the whole self-care and what you've been doing has been helpful with that whole transformation and been core to it. I mean, this is what it sounds like to me.
Yes, it really has been. If you paint the picture and say, look, we're going to focus on transparency to build trust, and we're going to focus on our people and sort of building them up through mental health and resiliency, I think those two things have been sort of the fuel that has helped us to provide a better consumer experience than we ever had at Twitter today.
Donald Hicks, man, it's been awesome chatting with you today. If you could, please share with the CX Igniters how they can get in touch with you.
Yes. So, Jim, I really appreciate the time with you and with all of you today. It really has been a pleasure. I do a ton of writing on these topics and others. So you can, number one, find me on Medium, just Donald Hicks. Just search for me there. You can also reach out directly. I'm on Twitter at dhicks. It is my handle, or you can email me at dhicks@twitter.com. I'm open. I'm available for anyone. We are all partners in this. I would love to learn from you, but also if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out.
Donald Hicks, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom and helping us all ignite that CX celebration all year long. Thank you for listening to the Customer Service Weekly podcast. Please rate, review, subscribe, follow, and share the Customer Service Weekly podcast and register for a free membership at customerserviceweekly.org to get the latest updates on how you can help ignite the CX spirit everywhere.